This is Bart Peterson, and you are listening to the FCPA Compliance Report on the Compliance Podcast Network.
This is Greg Gilchrist, and you are listening to the FCPA Compliance Report on the Compliance Podcast Network.
This is Dan DeMarco, and you are listening to the FCPA Compliance Report on the Compliance Podcast Network.
In this episode, I visit with Piero Molinaro, Senior Managing Director at K2 Intelligence Fin, Head of Financial Crimes, Risk and Compliance for EMEA, and Joanne Taylor, Managing Director at K2 Intelligence Fin. We take a deep dive into the FinCEN papers. What are the FinCEN papers? What is the meaning of the release of these documents? How you can use these going forward in your financial crimes compliance program, and the positives from this release of information.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm thrilled to have back with me Carrie Penman, one of my favorite people in compliance, and even more thrilled that we're going to talk about the upcoming NAVEX Next event. So, Carrie, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Tom, and it's so great to be back with you. I love being part of your podcast and listening to them, too.
So, Carrie, you were actually on one a little bit earlier this year called Compliance and Coronavirus that I started in March. And as the compliance and business landscape has evolved, the podcast has evolved. So I was extraordinarily intrigued why you guys named your conference, or excuse me, the event Beyond the Moment, because I'm seeing so much of that story in this podcast. So could I maybe start with that? I changed to NAVEX Next, but more importantly, beyond the moment, are we looking back? Are we talking about where we are now, or looking forward, or perhaps all three?
Yeah, all of the above, I guess. But, it's a really good question, Tom. And, we thought a lot about this. We changed the name and we picked the theme of Beyond the Moment really for two reasons. I think first, as you mentioned, we wanted to recognize that 2020 has been a year defined by just new and unprecedented challenges, not only for compliance, but beyond, the compliance officer, and the opportunities to have to work much more closely with the functional groups in our organizations. And so we often talk about the importance of building business and a compliance program that's proactive rather than reactive. And certainly the COVID pandemic and the other global events have certainly put us to the test there. So, we really want attendees of our conference to take away leading best practices that will support their efforts in the ability to be forward-looking. And whether that's in risk management or business continuity through the pandemic, or having a strong organizational culture with strong policies backing it up in the face of social justice, just so much has gone on since even that podcast we did together. If it was in March, it seems like years ago, but it's just a few months ago. So I think, the future demands that we be prepared for whatever comes next. And that means thinking well beyond the current challenges. And I think there's a second reason for the name change as well, because NAVEX Global has evolved as a business too. And we recognize that ethics and compliance no longer really describes our company goals and objectives entirely anymore. And so this conference really is an opportunity to present our expanded integrated risk management platform and thought leadership in this area. And I think it also highlights the connection between our mission to help organizations automate and streamline tasks, while really connecting the dots between ethics, risk, and compliance functions across organizations. So a longer-winded answer than your introduction.
I was extraordinarily, first of all, as always, you have multiple tracks going on, and this year you have 3 tracks. And what intrigued me about your tracks was it was almost as if those were the questions that you have gotten from your client base in 2020, and the questions they are asking about the next 12 to 18 24 months. I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about those 3 tracks, how you develop them, and what you hope to achieve with them.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that question. We did break it into 3 tracks. And, as you know, we start planning on this, much earlier than, kind of the thinking on this. So it was interesting how it all came together. But the first track is Workforce 2021. What does this all mean for us? Many organizations are not yet back to work. Regulations and enforcement, and that includes some discussion of the new DOJ guidance that we've also talked about. And finally, the future of risk. So for this event, we really sought out experts and practitioners who could speak to the challenges of the current environment and specifically with regard to the pandemic and the social justice issues. So in addition to the 3 tracks, we do have 3 main keynote presentations that align with those tracks. The first is around the new DOJ guidance. And we have Matt Miner, partner and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General of Criminal Division of the DOJ. He's currently with Morgan Lewis. Mark Phillip, who's partner now with Kirkland and Ellis, but the former DOJ Deputy Attorney General. And everyone we know and love, Pat Harned, the CEO of the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, America's oldest nonprofit, and ethics and compliance really in industry and all the research that she does there. So they are going to have a discussion about all of the changes in the guidance. And then second, we have a keynote on social justice and corporate responsibility. And our keynote speaker there is Robert Smith, who is the founder and chairman and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. And Robert was named in Forbes' top 100 greatest living business minds. He's actually also one of the owners of NAVEX Global. But in this particular session, Bob Conlon, our CEO, is going to lead a fireside chat with Robert Smith to talk about why and how business can decisively respond to renewed calls for expanded equity and inclusion, as well as some of the unique roles that he thinks compliance professionals can play in helping to affect meaningful change. And I think many people probably heard Robert's story of his success. And so I think that'll be a good session. And then the one I'm super excited about, because I have the opportunity to speak with Jerry Greenfield, the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. And this session will be on ethics at the heart of a successful business. And really talking to him about how placing ethics at the heart of the iconic Ben & Jerry's brand was really key to its success, and how businesses across industry can do better by doing good. And, you know, Tom, we've talked about this together a lot about, you know, the importance of doing good, and is good ethics good business. And so I think, you know, they were way ahead of their time on their work there. So I think, you know, the time I spent with Jerry in our planning session, I know it's going to be a really, really insightful session. I'm really excited for it.
So if I might just say a few words about each of those. First of all, other than you, Pat Harned's probably my most favorite person in compliance. And anytime you have the opportunity to watch Pat visit with someone, you should do it. So that's going to be a great conversation. I've had a lot of opportunities to visit with Bob Conlon over the years, and one of the things that I've wanted him to do is exactly what he's doing, which is to sit down and have a fireside chat. He's a great conversationalist, extraordinarily well-versed in compliance and in the business of compliance. And I've told him that I really wished he would, you know, do more of this type of thing. So when I saw that he was sitting down for a fireside chat with Robert Smith, I was very, very pleased. And then to have you sit down with Jerry Greenfield, I feel like it's almost as if I was going to get to sit down with Jerry, because you're going to ask all the questions I would want to ask. So, I mean, those 3 events are well worth the conference, but the conference is much more than that. And so I was wondering if you might be able to talk about some of the other sessions that you're really interested in or even really excited about. Yeah.
So I think it's going to be really an incredible day, but I'll mention a few because I'm just really excited at, again, some of the caliber of the speakers that we have in the concurrent sessions as well. And I want to point out that all of the sessions will be recorded, so people don't have to make a choice as to which one they attend. They can play back all of them at their convenience. But, you know, one is Beyond the Moment, creating sustainable diversity, equality, and inclusion programs. And for this session, we have Hy Feldblum, who's a former EEOC commissioner, Patrice M. Palmer, whose work focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion within higher ed. And then our very own and esteemed SVP of Human Resources and Organizational Development, Cindy Raz. And I have such a tremendous working relationship with Cindy on our own internal program. Cindy and I often talk about how we can help compliance and HR work together better than some organizations do now. So that's one session. And then another session, which is on the implications, obviously, of the EU whistleblower directive. So more in the regulatory track. And there we'll be talking with Karin Henriksen, who is from our Whistle Bee organization, on the new directive, as well as our privacy officer, Jess Wilburn, and a second Robert Smith, who will be speaking at this event, who is the head of ethics for Serco Group, based in the UK. So talking about how organizations should be thinking about implementing the EU whistleblower directive, and some thoughts as, each of the member states will be bringing in some different standards, and that's going to be presenting some challenges for a lot of organizations. And then maybe the third one I'll bring up here is with regard to ESG, or environment, social, and governance. And, there were just a ton of articles just this week that have been written about what investors are looking for and what standards are being set by investors. And then, what's going to be required by law. So we'll have, a really important discussion. And I think it's really critical for ethics and compliance officers to be broadening their focus to include environment, social, and governance. And we do work in the governance space quite a bit with our work with the boards. But going beyond that and thinking about issues like racial equality and the impact of the Me Too movement and climate change, it's going to be a big focus for business. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for compliance officers to get involved in this area and to really, again, make a difference. And, we always talk about the role that we play in the reputation of our organization. And, this is front and center.
So in addition to, obviously, the conference going virtual, how is the conference going to address the new normal? And if I could maybe just expand on that a little bit, one of the phrases that I heard in my Compliance and Coronavirus podcast was from disaster recovery to business continuity to business as usual. And it seems like to me the new normal, certainly for compliance, is business as usual, whatever that usual may be. It may be we're recording this in October 2020. It may be as it was back in March if we have another wave, or it could be something else 6 months from now. So how will the conference help the compliance practitioner understand that we now have to respond to a much wider variety of business changes and indeed risks than we ever considered?
Absolutely. And I'd be shocked, if probably as you would be too, if we actually would return to whatever our previous normal was. I think, we're going to see so many more folks working remotely, even after offices return. We've all learned a lot, but it's also created different risks that have been associated with both remote working and then thinking about returning workforces. So, we do have some sessions with the high profile legal practitioners in employment law, some located globally and working around the world to discuss some of the hotspots in areas like data privacy and third-party risk, health and safety issues, as well as harassment and discrimination. I think if there's one thing that we certainly learned about the ability for third parties to be a weakest link, I think we've learned it in the last 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we've got the new DOJ guidance that's going to be, is influencing our programs. And as I noted earlier, we're bringing in 2 former DOJ leaders to discuss this and, expand on issues like proving effectiveness and what it means for the broader environment. And then I think finally, the third area of focus for us is in the area of integrated risk management, because here again, I think, and it's really why we've changed the name of the conference as well, because as the pandemic has really been showing us, business resiliency and integrated risk management are really a competitive advantage. And so a lot of people are very interested in building out integrated risk programs and not just staying as narrowly focused on some of the more traditional compliance risks, if you will, that we have tended to focus on. So we have Dr. French Caldwell, we have advisors from PricewaterhouseCoopers and other experts that will be presenting on those topics. So I think all of these things are top of mind for business now, but there's another common thread that risk, compliance, HR, and the legal professionals must also consider, and that is the social justice reform. And whether that's driven by regulations or business interest or customers or the ESG, expectations, we're talking a lot about topics like Black Lives Matter and proactive policy as well. So I think whatever business as usual will be, and I sure hope that we can get past this pandemic soon, but I think business will be forever changed.
Let me just pick up on that last point on the social justice movement, because Matt Kelly and I talk a lot about what's the role of the compliance professional, what's the role of the CCO. Is that something that you will be able to explore in this conference and maybe help compliance practitioners think about that really from a cultural, ethical, integrity perspective?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why we devoted one track to the workforce of 2021. And I think, as well, I think the fireside chat with Robert Smith, will be addressing that subject. And, in the working session with Hy Feldblum and our own Cindy Raz. So I think it is potentially a conversation that hasn't been one that's been typical with ethics and compliance officers. But, if you think about the fact that, 80% of our reports that we take over our hotlines are human resources issues, and they are about issues of harassment and discrimination and people treating each other with, lack of respect. And I think, perhaps we haven't paid enough attention to those issues for the period of time that they've been coming in over our helplines and hotlines.
So if I could draw maybe on my relationship with you or your personal experience, certainly since the time I've known you, you have counseled compliance officers and others that it's really about how you treat people. It's really about respect. And the times I've had the opportunity to visit with you and you've talked about your professional career, it was always extraordinarily important to you that people treated each other with respect, with dignity and respect. And so it almost seems to me that what you've been basically preaching for 20 years or 30 years now, it's a straight line to where we are now.
Exactly. And early on in my career, I used to joke, but it wasn't really funny that my legacy at Westinghouse was going to be Miss Manners. But, I think it really is about how people want to be treated and the respect that they deserve in the workplace. And, I'm glad that we're really taking these conversations to heart and really thinking about how, because you're right, it comes down to organizational culture. And if people don't feel respected, how can you expect them to, respect the organization back and perform in a way that will help all of our objectives move forward.
Carrie, unfortunately, we're getting near the end of our time, but I was wondering if listeners, or what else could you tell us about NAVEX Next that might be important for listeners? And if they wanted to register, where could they go? And we're certainly going to link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely. So, as I said, we're just so excited for this conference and really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you about the event. The event, of course, probably would be helpful to know the date, coming up on October 22nd. And it will be broadcasting throughout the day. We've planned it so that there are some opportunities for folks in Europe to catch some of the earlier sessions, and we'll go throughout the day. As I mentioned, everything is going to be recorded, so you can play back sessions that you missed at your convenience. There will be a lot of resources that are posted alongside the slides from the various speakers. So hopefully it will be a great resource for your listeners, for our customers, and the industry. And as far as where to register, you can go to our website, which is www.navexglobal.com. And from that homepage, you can link to it. But Tom, thank you so much for also providing a link in your session notes. So really appreciate this opportunity, and thanks so much for having me on. I always love talking to you, Tom.
Well, and I'm greatly looking forward to the event, so I will definitely be one of the attendees.
All right. Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. I've linked to the K2 Intelligence Fin website and then 2 resources, a white paper and a client alert that they put out around the fins and paper. So check those out in the show notes. This presentation of the FCPA Compliance Report has been a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. This podcast is also a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to visiting with you again soon.